My sister Allison invited me to her engagement dinner, but forgot to reserve a seat for me, forcing me to eat at the bar. When the $2,800 bill arrived, she smirked and slid it my way. She didn't know I'd already cut off the family credit card. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The room was spinning, a slow, nauseating rotation that had nothing to do with the medication I had just taken and everything to do with the text message glaring up at me from my phone screen. I was lying on the sofa, a cold compress pressed against my forehead, trying to manage the lingering tremors of a stress-induced migraine that had put me out of commission for 3 days. My doctor had been explicitly clear. Aurora, your cortisol levels are catastrophic. If you don't stop carrying the weight of the world, your body is going to break permanently. I had just started to drift into a painless sleep when the vibration buzzed against my chest. It wasn't a check-in, it wasn't a "how are you feeling?" or "do you need anything?" from the family I had spent the last decade supporting. It was a digital flyer. A gaudy gold font JPEG announcing, Allison and Brandon, the engagement dinner. Chez L'Argent. Friday, 7:00 p.m. Be there to celebrate love. Beneath the image, a separate text bubble from my mother, Melody, popped up. Don't be late this time. Brandon's parents are coming and we need to make a good impression. Wear something that doesn't look like office wear. I stared at the ceiling, the familiar, bitter taste of resentment rising in my throat. I was 34 years old, a senior forensic accountant who spent 60 hours a week hunting down hidden assets and untangling financial fraud for Fortune 500 companies. I had bought my mother's house. I paid my sister Allison's rent. I had financed the very car Allison drove to her content creation shoots. And yet, here I was, curled up in a blanket, physically broken from overwork, being summoned like a servant to foot the bill for a party I hadn't even been consulted on. The audacity wasn't surprising. That was the tragedy of it. It was expected. They didn't see a sister or a daughter when they looked at me. They saw a walking bank account with a pulse. But this time, the entitlement felt sharper, heavier. Maybe it was the fever, or maybe it was the realization that while I was dissolving under the pressure, they were busy planning how to spend money I hadn't even earned yet. I closed my eyes, the light of the phone screen burning an afterimage behind my eyelids. I realized then that the headache wasn't just physical. It was the crushing weight of a realization I had been avoiding for years. They didn't love me. They loved what I provided. And as I looked at that demand, be late, I felt something snap. It wasn't a loud crack, but a quiet, irreversible fracture in the foundation of my loyalty. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. You are not going, Mila said. Her voice was calm, dangerous, and low, the tone she used when she was cross-examining a hostile witness. Mila, my partner of 4 years and a corporate litigation attorney who terrified grown men for a living, was standing in our kitchen, chopping vegetables with a precision that was almost violent. She had seen the text. She had also seen me vomiting from stress 2 hours prior. I have to go, Mila, I whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders as I sat up. If I don't, Melody will call me every 15 minutes until I answer. Allison will post some passive-aggressive story about fake family on her Instagram. It's easier to just show up, endure the 2 hours, and leave. It is not easier, Aurora, Mila countered, setting the knife down with a sharp clack. She turned to face me, her eyes dark with protective fury. They are bleeding you dry. You just paid off Allison's credit card debt. Again, $6,000, Aurora, and now they want you to show up to a dinner at Chez L'Argent? Do you know the prix-fixe menu there starts at $200 a head? Who do you think is paying for that? I looked away, staring at the floor. We both knew the answer. It's her engagement, Mila. Brandon proposed. And I'm sure Brandon is chipping in, right? Mila laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. The visionary entrepreneur who hasn't generated a profit in 3 years, please. They are inviting you because they need your black card, not your company. I know, I admitted, my voice trembling. I know that, but she's my sister. Mila softened, walking over to kneel beside the sofa. She took my cold hand in hers. Honey, why are abusing that title? You are sick. You are literally physically ill from the stress they put on you, and they haven't asked once how you are. I'm going, I said, firming my resolve, though my stomach churned. But I'm not going to be the doormat this time. I need to see it. I need to see them do it in person. I need to look Brandon in the eye and see if he really thinks he can marry into my payroll. Mila studied my face for a long moment, looking for the cracks in my armor. She must have seen something new there, a coldness that hadn't existed before, because she nodded slowly. Fine, she said. We go, but we go on my terms. I'm driving. And if anyone says one word to you about your outfit or your job, we walk. Deal, I agreed. I picked up my phone to reply to Melody. We'll be there. Simple, direct, no promise of payment, no apology for my silence. As I hit send, a thought occurred to me. I had spent the last week restructuring my own finances, moving assets into protected trusts, and separating my accounts from the joint access I had foolishly granted my mother years ago. It was supposed to be for tax purposes, a way to shield my earnings from potential liability in my high-risk field. But as the sent notification appeared on the screen, I realized the timing was serendipitous. Melody and Allison operated on the assumption that the well was infinite and that the bucket was always full. They assumed that because I had always paid, I always would. They moved through life with the confidence of people who had never faced a consequence. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand why this dinner was such a pivotal moment, you have to understand the history. I wasn't just a supportive sister, I was the structural integrity of the family. When our father left 15 years ago, Melody fell apart. I was 19, a sophomore in college on a scholarship. I worked 3 jobs, barista, tutor, and overnight data entry, to keep the lights on in our childhood home while Melody found herself, a process that mostly involved buying healing crystals and refusing to get a job. Allison was 11 then. I became her de facto parent. I bought her school clothes, I paid for her field trips, and eventually, I paid for her degree in media communications that she barely used. I had conditioned them to view me as a resource. It was my fault as much as theirs. I thought if I solved their problems, I would earn their love. I thought if I filled the bank accounts, I would fill the void our father left. But generosity without boundaries doesn't create gratitude. It creates entitlement. Mila and I arrived at Chez L'Argent at 7:05 p.m. The restaurant was the kind of place that smelled like old money and truffle oil. Dim lighting, velvet booths, and waiters who judged your shoes before they poured your water. We spotted the table immediately. It was in the center of the room, a long, banquet-style arrangement festooned with white roses and excessive candlelight. My mother, Melody, was already seated, holding a glass of champagne, laughing loudly at something Brandon's father was saying. Allison was posed at the head of the table, snapping a selfie with her ring hand extended, finding the perfect lighting. And then there was Brandon. I had met Brandon only 3 times, and each time left me feeling like I needed a shower. He was 28, handsome in a generic catalog model way, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He claimed to be a blockchain consultant and a visionary, but as a forensic accountant, I knew a shell game when I saw one. He spoke in buzzwords, wore knockoff luxury watches, and had a terrifyingly keen interest in my career. Aurora, you made it, Brandon called out as we approached, not standing up to greet us. He gestured vaguely with a fork. We were worried the corporate grind had swallowed you whole. Hello, Brandon, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Melody, Allison. Allison looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning my outfit, a simple black dress with critical disapproval. Hey, you look tired. Did you not have time to put on concealer? I've been sick, Allison. I said, waiting for a flicker of concern. Oh, well, try to perk up, okay? This is a celebration, she said, flipping her hair. The photographer is going to be here in 20 minutes. Mila squeezed my hand, her grip tight. Where are we sitting? Mila asked, scanning the table. The table was full. Brandon's parents, his brother, Melody, Allison's two besties from her sorority days, and a couple of Brandon's business partners occupied every chair. There were place cards at every setting, calligraphy on heavy cardstock. I scanned the names. Brandon, Allison, Melody, Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson. My name wasn't there. Neither was Mila's. Oh, Allison giggled, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. Right, so, about that. We kind of hit the capacity for the main tab. The deposit only covered 12 seats, and Brandon really needed his investors here. I figured you wouldn't mind, since you're family. You guys can just grab a spot at the bar or that high top over there. She pointed to a small, isolated table near the kitchen doors, far removed from the celebration. You invited us, Mila said, her voice dropping an octave, to an engagement dinner, and you didn't save a seat for your sister. It's not a big deal, Mila, Brandon interjected, leaning back and draping an arm over Allison's chair. We're all in the same room. We'll still scream cheers to you guys. Besides, he winked at me, a gesture that made my skin crawl, we know Aurora prefers to be low-key. She's the silent partner, right? The engine behind the scenes. He grinned, and in that smile, I saw the entire dynamic laid bare. He knew. He knew exactly who was expected to pay for this dinner. He knew I was the silent partner, the financier. He was banking on my shame, on my desperate need to keep up appearances, to make me swallow this insult and still hand over my credit card at the end of the night. He was testing his power. He wanted to see if he could humiliate me and rob me in the same breath. Right, I said, a strange calmness settling over me. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. The silent partner. Great, grab a drink, put it on the tab. Allison waved her hand dismissively. We're ordering appetizers in 5. Mila looked ready to flip the table, but I placed a hand on her arm. It's fine, Mila, I said loud enough for the table to hear. The bar is perfect. We walked away from the center of the room. As we sat on the high stools, with a view of my family laughing and clinking glasses, I signaled the bartender. Sparkling water for me and a Pinot Noir for her, I said. Then I leaned in close to the bartender, a serious young man named David. And David, I need to open a separate tab, just for me and her. Under no circumstances is anything from that table, I pointed to the center banquet, to be added to my bill. Do you understand? David looked at the table, then back at my tired eyes. He nodded solemnity. Understood, ma'am, strictly separate. Good, I whispered, watching Brandon order the most expensive scotch on the menu. Let the games begin. From our vantage point at the polished mahogany bar, Mila and I had a direct line of sight to the spectacle unfolding at the center table. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car was made of seafood towers, and the driver was drinking vintage Dom Perignon on a credit limit that didn't exist. Look at him, Mila murmured, sipping her Pinot Noir, her eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting a field mouse. He's ordering for the table without asking anyone what they want. That's a power move. He's trying to show the Hendersons he's the alpha in the room. I watched Brandon wave the sommelier over for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. Another bottle of the 15, I heard him boom, his voice carrying over the low hum of the restaurant. And bring the Wagyu sliders for the table. My treat. My treat. The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I pulled my phone out and placed it on the bar. My hands were still trembling slightly, a residual effect of the fever that was just beginning to break, but my mind was sharpening by the second. I opened my banking app. What are you looking for? Mila asked, glancing down at the screen. Confirmation, I whispered. I navigated to the alert section of my primary checking account, the one I had shared with Melody for emergencies since I was 22. For years, Emergency had been loosely interpreted to mean anything from a flat tire to a last-minute trip to Cabo for Allison's mental health. But 3 days ago, from my sickbed, I had finally severed the link. I had transferred the bulk of my liquid assets into a new, high-yield trust account solely in my name and put a strict freeze on the joint card. I scrolled down, there it was. Decline transaction, $4,500, the Ritz-Carlton, Maui. 2:15 p.m. today. Decline transaction, $4,500, the Ritz-Carlton, Maui. 2:16 p.m. today. Decline transaction, $200, Uber Black. 6:30 p.m. today. He tried to book their honeymoon this afternoon, I said, sliding the phone toward Mila. And he tried to take a luxury car here tonight. Both declined. Mila let out a low whistle. So he knows, he has to know the card is dead. Or he thinks it's a glitch, I corrected, watching Brandon laugh raucously at something Mr. Henderson said, leaning in too close, invading the older man's personal space. He's arrogant enough to assume I just forgot to pay the bill or hit a limit. He doesn't think I have the spine to actually cut him off. I tapped on another app, a secure portal I used for work. It was a background check service, LexisNexis, the kind usually reserved for vetting corporate mergers or INV. Estigating embezzlement. I had run a preliminary check on Brandon Miller the day Allison announced the engagement, but I had been too sick to do a deep dive. Now, fueled by the adrenaline of the insult, I logged in. Aurora, Mila warned softly, you're working. I'm protecting my investment, I countered. If I'm the silent partner, I have a right to audit the books. I typed in his full name and the date of birth I'd seen on the party invite. The search wheel spun for a moment before populating a dense list of public records. My eyes scanned the data and my breath hitched. What is it? Mila asked, sensing the shift in my posture. He claims to be a blockchain consultant with holdings in Dubai, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But according to this, he has 3 active liens against him in Florida. He was evicted from an apartment in Miami 6 months ago. And his consultancy firm, it's an LLC registered to a P.O. box in Delaware that was dissolved by the state for failure to pay taxes last year. I looked up at the table. Brandon was currently holding court, gesturing wildly with a crab leg. He wasn't a visionary. He wasn't even a successful con artist. He was a drowning man looking for a life raft, and he had decided my family was the Titanic he could climb aboard. He's broke, Mila, completely insolvent. He's using this dinner to pitch the Hendersons on some investment, hoping their money covers his debts before the wedding. Mila's expression hardened from annoyance to professional lethality. And he thinks you're going to cover the overhead costs of his scam tonight. He's betting on it, I said, locking my phone. He thinks I'm too weak to cause a scene. He thinks I'll just pay the bill to save face for Allison. I looked at my sister. She was glowing, oblivious, laughing at something Brandon whispered in her ear. She was selfish, yes. She was entitled, absolutely. But she was being played by a professional. The trap is set, I said, taking a sip of my sparkling water. Now we just wait for the bill. The dinner lasted 2 agonizing hours. Mila and I ate our modest salads and shared a plate of truffle fries, keeping our heads down while the bill at the main table swelled like a ticking bomb. I watched them order desserts, gold-flaked chocolate mousse, a flight of expensive cognacs for the men, and saw the waiters scurrying back and forth with deferential nods. Around 9:30 p.m., the atmosphere at the main table shifted. The laughter died down, replaced by the sluggish, heavy satisfaction of a meal that cost more than a used sedan. I saw Brandon signal David, the waiter. He made a sweeping, grandiose signing motion in the air, the universal gesture for bring me the damage. David arrived with the leather folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of Brandon. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, as Brandon didn't even open it. He simply smiled, tapped the folder, and pointed a finger directly across the room. At me. I saw him mouth the words, My sister-in-law, over there. David hesitated. He looked at Brandon, then at the folder, then over at me. He was a good waiter. He remembered my instructions. He shook his head politely and said something back to Brandon. Brandon's smile faltered. He pointed again, more aggressively this time. The investors, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, were watching the exchange with confusion. Melody leaned in, looking concerned. David picked up the folder and walked over to the bar. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, miss," David said quietly, placing the folder on the bar between us. "The gentleman insists that you are the host of the party." I didn't open the folder. "David, what did I tell you when I sat down?" "That you have a separate tab, and under no circumstances were you paying for the table," he recited perfectly. "Exactly. Please return the bill to the gentleman who ordered the food. My partner and I will take our check, please." David looked relieved to have a clear directive, even if it meant walking back into the line of fire. He nodded and returned to the table. He placed the folder back in front of Brandon and spoke firmly. The reaction was immediate. Brandon's face turned a shade of red that clashed violently with his tie. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The entire restaurant seemed to go silent as he marched across the room toward the bar, with Allison trailing nervously behind him. "Aurora," Brandon barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads 3 tables away. "What is the meaning of this? Why is the waiter giving me the bill?" I swiveled slowly on my bar stool to face him. I didn't stand up. "Because you ordered the food, Brandon. Usually, that's how restaurants work." "Don't play games with me," he hissed, leaning in close, the smell of expensive scotch and desperation radiating off him. "You know how this works. You handle the logistics. I handle the networking. We're a team." "We are not a team," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'm not even a guest. I'm a patron at the bar. I didn't have a seat, remember? Capacity issues." "Oh my God, Aurora, stop being so dramatic," Allison chimed in, her voice shrill. She grabbed Brandon's arm, looking back at the Hendersons, who were now openly staring. "Just give them the card. You're embarrassing us in front of the investors. We'll pay you back later." "Pay me back with what, Allison?" I asked, looking her dead in the eye. "With the money from the joint account, the one I closed 3 days ago." Allison froze. "What?" "You heard me. The credit card is gone. The access is revoked." Brandon laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. He turned to the room, spreading his hands wide. "She's off her meds. Everyone, ignore her. She's been having a mental health episode this week. Very sad. She gets confused about finances." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. He was weaponizing my exhaustion, my physical illness, painting me as unstable to discredit me. That was the mistake. Mila stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She simply projected her courtroom voice, crisp and devastatingly clear. "Mr. Miller," she said, stepping between him and me, "I would be very careful about making defamatory statements regarding my client's mental health in a public setting, especially when you have 3 outstanding liens in Florida and a dissolved LLC in Delaware." The color drained from Brandon's face so fast he looked like a ghost. "What did you say?" he whispered. "We aren't on the guest list," Mila said, smiling icily. "We aren't on the bill. And considering your financial history, I'd suggest you find a new way to settle up with Shay L. Argent before they call the police. Fraud of services is a felony, Brandon." The silence that followed Mila's declaration was absolute. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, even the ambient jazz music seemed to halt. All eyes were on our trio by the bar. "You checked my background?" Brandon sputtered, his bravado crumbling into indignation. "You invaded my privacy? That's illegal. I'll sue you." "Public records are not privacy, Brandon," I said, finally standing up. My legs felt stronger now. The headache was gone, replaced by the sharp clarity of justice. And as a forensic accountant, it's literally my job to spot when numbers don't add up. And you, Brandon, are a mathematical impossibility. Melody, who had been watching from the table with growing horror, rushed over. Her heels clicked frantically on the hardwood. Aurora, stop this immediately. You are ruining your sister's night. Just pay the bill. We can discuss this at home. No, Mom, I said, turning to her. We can't, because there is no home to discuss it in. Not when you pay for anyway. I'm done. What do you mean you're done? Melody demanded, her hands fluttering nervously. Brandon is family. He's going to take care of Allison. He can't even take care of a dinner check, Mom. I gestured to the folder still sitting on the bar. The bill is $2,800. Ask him to pay it. Right now. If he's the wealthy entrepreneur he claims to be, this should be pocket change. Go ahead. Ask him. Melody turned to Brandon, expecting him to laugh it off and produce a platinum card. Brandon, darling, just pay it and we'll sort it out with Aurora later. She's clearly having a bad reaction to her fever. Brandon shifted his weight, tugging at his collar. Sweat was beading on his forehead. He looked back at the table where the Hendersons were now exchanging dark, whispered looks. He couldn't pay. If he used his card, it would decline. If he admitted he couldn't pay, the Hendersons would walk. He was trapped. My assets are currently tied up in a liquidity pool for the crypto project, Brandon stammered, his voice cracking. It takes 3 business days to clear a transfer. Aurora knows this. She's doing this on purpose to sabotage the deal. A liquidity pool? I repeated, fighting the urge to laugh. Brandon, your Wells Fargo checking account has a balance of $42.16. I checked the routing number you used to try and pay the deposit on the venue, the one that bounced. That's a lie, he shrieked, looking wild-eyed. Is it? I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printout of the preliminary report I had run in the car. I didn't hand it to him. I walked past him, past Allison, who stood with her mouth open in shock, and walked straight to the main table. I placed the paper gently in front of Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I said politely, I believe you're considering investing in Mr. Miller's new venture. Before you sign anything, you might want to ask him why his previous investors in Miami are currently suing him for Ponzi scheme allegations. Mr. Henderson picked up the paper. He put on his reading glasses. He read the first few lines, and his face went rigid. Aurora, Allison screamed, running over and grabbing my arm. What are you doing? You're jealous. You've always been jealous because I'm the happy one. You're just a bitter, lonely workaholic who wants to ruin everything. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She wasn't glowing anymore. She looked small, mean, and terrified. She knew, deep down, she had to know, she just didn't want the party to end. I'm not jealous, Allison, I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. I'm exhausted. I've paid for your clothes, your car, your rent, and your mistakes for 10 years. But I'm not paying for your divorce. And if you marry him, I pointed at Brandon, who was currently being cornered by the restaurant manager. That is exactly what you're buying. Excuse me, Mr. Henderson said, standing up abruptly. He didn't look at Brandon. He looked at his wife. We're leaving. Wait, John, please. Brandon rushed toward them, but the manager blocked his path. Sir, the manager said, his voice dropping to that terrifyingly polite register that precedes a call to the authorities. We need to settle the bill before anyone leaves the premises. She's paying. Brandon pointed at me again, desperate. She's the sister. She has the money. I have a separate tab, I said to the manager. My partner and I are settling our $40 bill. As for the rest, I looked at the table laden with half-eaten lobster and empty bottles of wine. I believe the groom insisted it was his treat. The manager nodded and turned back to Brandon. Sir, card or cash, now, or I call the police. The restaurant was dead silent. Allison was sobbing. Melody was staring at me as if I had grown a second head. Brandon looked like he was about to vomit. The silence in Chez L'Argent was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from embarrassment and the thrill of witnessing a public execution. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that seemed to amplify the sound of Brandon's panicked breathing. "Sir," the manager repeated, his voice devoid of any warmth. He was a tall man with impeccable posture, the kind of person who dealt with declined cards discreetly, unless the patron was making a scene. "I need a form of payment. Now." Brandon patted his pockets for the fourth time, a pantomime of searching for a wallet we all knew was empty. "I told you, my bank flagged the transaction because it's a large sum. It's for my protection. If you just let me call them." "You've had 20 minutes to call them," the manager said, checking his watch. "The card is declined. The backup card is declined. The digital wallet is empty." Mr. Henderson, the investor, who was supposed to be Brandon's golden ticket, stood up. He was a man who wore suits that cost more than my first car, and he looked at Brandon with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Brandon," Mr. Henderson said, his voice carrying the weight of finality, "we're leaving." "No, John, wait." Brandon lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of Mr. Henderson's jacket. "Please, just cover the bill for tonight. As a sign of good faith, I can have the funds wired to your personal account by Monday morning with interest. 10% interest." Mr. Henderson peeled Brandon's fingers off his sleeve as if they were contaminated. "You invited us to dinner to pitch a business proposal based on liquidity and high-yield assets. Yet you cannot pay for a lobster thermidor. Do you take me for a fool?" "It's a glitch," Brandon screamed, his voice cracking. "It's fraud," Mrs. Henderson corrected, stepping out from behind her husband. She looked at me, then at Allison, her gaze withering. "And to think we were considering introducing you to our network. You're not entrepreneurs, you're grifters." She turned to me. "You're the sister, the accountant." "I am," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Smart girl," she nodded once, a sharp, appreciative gesture. "You cut the rope before the anchor dragged you down. Good for you." With that, the Hendersons walked out. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them with a definitive thud that echoed like a gavel strike. "Now look what you've done," Melody shrieked. She turned on me, her face contorted in a mask of fury I hadn't seen since I refused to co-sign a loan for her boutique idea 5 years ago. "You chased them away. You humiliated him. Are you happy now? You've ruined your sister's future." "I didn't ruin anything, Mom," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. It was strange. For years, her anger had been my command. It had been the trigger that made me open my wallet just to make the yelling stop. But tonight it just sounded like noise. Brandon ruined it. Brandon ordered food he couldn't pay for. Brandon lied to investors. I just refused to be the collateral damage. "He's family," Melody shouted, gesturing to where Brandon was now arguing with the manager about a payment plan. "Family helps each other." "Family doesn't steal, Melody," Mila interjected, stepping forward. She crossed her arms, her posture unyielding. "Family doesn't rack up $6,000 in credit card debt in their sister's name and then call her jealous for cutting them off." "It wasn't stealing," Allison sobbed from her seat. She had her head in her hands, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. "It was an investment in my brand. I was going to pay you back once the sponsorship deals came in." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was 30 years old, yet she sat there like a petulant teenager, genuinely believing that her delusions of fame were a valid currency. "With what money, Allison?" I asked softly, walking over to her table. The other diners were watching openly now, phones out, recording the drama. I didn't care. "You don't have a job, you don't have savings, you have me. You've always had me. And because of that, you've never had to grow up." "I hate you," she whispered, looking up at me with wet, red-rimmed eyes. "I hate you for this." "I know," I said, and for the first time, the words didn't hurt. "You hate me because I stopped enabling you. That's not love, Allison, that's addiction." "Ma'am," the manager interrupted, stepping between us. He looked at Brandon, who was now sweating profusely and tapping frantically on his phone. "I'm calling the police. This is theft of services." "No," Brandon gasped. No police, look, I have a watch, it's a Rolex, take it as collateral. He fumbled with the clasp of the gold watch on his wrist, nearly dropping it in the clam chowder. He shoved it toward the manager. The manager took it, examined it for less than 2 seconds, and handed it back with a sneer. This is a knockoff, sir. The second hand is ticking, not sweeping. It's worth maybe $50 on Canal Street. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw Allison's head snap up. What? She breathed. It's a custom movement, Brandon stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Let me see the ring, Allison said. Her voice was quiet, trembling. Not now, babe, Brandon said, backing away. The guy doesn't know watches, he's just a manager. Let me see the ring, Brandon, Allison screamed, standing up and grabbing his hand. She yanked the engagement ring off her finger, the massive, sparkling stone she had been flashing all over Instagram for 3 weeks. She held it up to the candlelight. Then, she did something I didn't expect. She took the heavy steak knife from the table and scratched the surface of the diamond. It left a deep, white gouge. Real diamonds don't scratch. Glass does. Cubic zirconia does. Allison stared at the scratched stone. The silence that stretched between them was louder than the screaming had been. You said it was 3 carats, she whispered. You said it was insured for $20,000. I was going to replace it, Brandon pleaded, holding his hands up. Once the crypto took off, it was a placeholder, Allie. You know how it is. A placeholder? Allison threw the ring at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the floor. You're a fraud. You're a broke, lying fraud. And you, she turned to Melody, you told me he was a catch. You told me he had potential. He did, Melody cried, looking between her 2 daughters, realizing her retirement plan was imploding. He dressed so well. At that moment, the blue and red lights flashed against the front window of the restaurant. 2 uniformed officers walked in, their radios crackling. Who's the manager? One officer asked. Right here, the manager said, pointing a finger at Brandon. This gentleman has consumed $2,800 worth of food and drink and has no means to pay. Sir, step outside, please, the officer said, reaching for Brandon's arm. Wait, my fiancé can pay, Brandon yelled, pointing at Allison. She has money, her sister has money. Allison stood there, the scratched glass ring on the floor, the fake watch on the table, and the wreckage of her engagement dinner surrounding her. She looked at Brandon as the officer cuffed him. I don't have a fiancé, Allison said, her voice hollow. As they dragged Brandon out, shouting about his rights and his consultancy firm, the restaurant erupted into low murmurs. The manager turned to the table. The bill still stands. Someone has to pay it. Melody looked at me. It was a desperate, pleading look. Aurora, please, we can't go to jail just this once. I promise I'll pay you back. I'll sell the car. I'll do anything. I looked at the bill, then I looked at Mila. Mila nodded, handing me my purse. I pulled out a $20 bill and a 10. I placed them on the bar. This covers my sparkling water, Mila's wine, and a 30% tip for David, who was Excel. NT, I said to the manager. And the rest? The manager asked, looking at Melody and Allison. My mother has a 401k, I said calmly. It's not much, but I believe it has a debit card attached to it. It should cover the damage. Aurora, no, that's for my retirement, Melody gasped. Then I guess you better start enjoying the seafood, I said, because you just bought it. I took Mila's hand. We're leaving, I have work in the morning. We walked out of the restaurant, past the police car, where Brandon was being shoved into the back seat, past my mother crying over her retirement fund, past my sister staring blankly at a menu she couldn't afford. The night air outside was cold, crisp, and tasted sweeter than any wine I had ever drunk. The fallout was spectacular, in the way a controlled demolition is spectacular. It was messy, loud, and dusty, but when it settled, the dangerous structure was gone. Brandon was charged with theft of services and fraud. It turned out Shay L. Argent wasn't his only victim. Once his name hit the police blotter, 3 other luxury venues in the city came forward with unpaid bills. He pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy trial and was currently serving 6 months in county, followed by 3 years of probation. The blockchain consultancy dissolved faster than his courage had that night. The bill at the restaurant, all $2,800 of it, was eventually paid. Melody had to liquidate a significant portion of her small retirement savings to cover it, plus the legal fees for the disorderly conduct citation she received for screaming at the officers. It was a harsh lesson in economics. If you order the lobster, you better have the cash. For the first month, my phone was silent. No texts, no calls, no guilt-tripping voicemails. It was the silence of a bridge that had been burned so thoroughly there wasn't even ash left to cross. I used that silence to heal. My migraines disappeared. My cortisol levels dropped. I started sleeping through the night. I put the money I would have spent on Allison's rent into a vacation fund for Mila and me. It was 3 months later when the first contact came. I was sitting in my office, reviewing a forensic audit for a tech merger, when my personal phone buzzed. It was a text from Allison. I hesitated before opening it. My thumb hovered over the screen, the old reflex of anxiety twitching in my chest. What did she want? Money? A ride? To scream at me again. Mila, who was reading on the couch opposite my desk, looked up. Is it them? Allison, I said. You don't have to read it, Mila reminded me. I know. I opened it. Hey, I got a job. It's just reception at a dental office, but it pays hourly. I moved back in with Mom. We're splitting the bills. It sucks. I miss the apartment. But I saw the ring report. The police gave it back with his stuff. It was glass, Aurora. It was literal glass. 3 dots danced on the screen. I'm sorry, about the dinner, about everything. I don't expect you to fix this. I just wanted you to know I'm working. I stared at the message. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was still centered on her feelings, her loss. But the key sentence was there, I don't expect you to fix this. For the first time in her life, Allison was solving her own problem. She was working a job she likely hated to pay bills she had helped create. It was the first step of a marathon she would have to run alone. I typed back, I'm glad you found a job, Allison. Good luck. I didn't offer to help. I didn't offer to top up her account. I didn't invite her to dinner. I just acknowledged her reality and let her live in it. That evening, Mila and I went out for dinner. We didn't go to a 5-star seafood palace. We went to a small, quiet Italian place we loved, where the pasta was homemade and the wine was cheap but good. When the bill came, there was no anxiety. There was no looking around for someone else to pick it up. There was no dread of a declined card. I picked up the check. Mila smiled at me, raising her glass. To the silent partner, she teased gently. I shook my head, signing my name with a flourish. No, to the majority shareholder. I had reclaimed my assets. I had reclaimed my family dynamic. But most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. The cost of that engagement dinner had been $2,800 for them, but for me, the price of admission to my new life was absolutely free.